And the EFF converges on Eskom demanding the power utility increase its generating capacity to avoid load shedding. South Africa is committed to reducing its carbon emissions. That's the word from Environmental Affairs Minister Barbara Creecy. She's concerned that we still rely on coal-fired power stations, though. The minister has reported back to climate change stakeholders after COP25 negotiations in Madrid. Khayelihle Khumalo is joining us in studio to tell us more about that. I almost said Madrid.
Well, way too far, way too apart.
Yeah, way too. Well, the minister had to fly there and she caused emissions, right? But tell us what South Africa is doing to deal with climate change.
Well, Shahan, two instruments that the South African authorities are really using to try and really galvanize more support. So they want to establish a presidential climate change commission. So it's going to be a very inclusive structure. It's going to be social partners, civil society and the government itself. So they will have a very united approach in terms of trying to deal with this, because one of the key issues is that we have to move into a very lower carbon economy as opposed to the very reliance on coal, for example, when it comes to the energy. So Shahan, if we may perhaps listen to the minister really elaborating further.
South Africa is a responsible global citizen and has always been part of the multilateral process that is aimed at combating climate change. So we were a signatory to Kyoto, we are a signatory to the Paris Accord, and South Africa at a domestic level is in the process of developing its responses both to the issue of mitigation, how we reduce greenhouse gases in our country, and also, of course, how do we adapt to climate change. Now, one of the issues that we understand going forward to COP26 is that we will have to be giving a report on how we are doing with regard to the mitigation of greenhouse gases. We are in the process of preparing that report, and it will be going to Cabinet shortly, and then obviously we can make that information available in the public domain. We've also got to prepare to review our nationally determined contribution to the mitigation of greenhouse gases, and that's something that our President has committed we will do in consultation with all social partners.
All right, so are climate change activists actually buying what the minister has to say?
Well, they are absolutely enraged, Shahan. So they want a very proactive approach, but also just in terms of the country to declare this an emergency, because we've seen the impact in KwaZulu-Natal. We've seen some devastating floods in the neighboring countries in Mozambique. I mean, we saw two cyclones, one after the other. But currently also in East Africa, we're seeing the invasion of locusts and stuff. So those are very easy examples that activists are saying we have to really be proactive in how we're dealing with this. But of course, we know the complication, Shahan, that climate change actually requires collective approach as opposed to a one country, response. But also the minister was very adamant that, they have all their ducks in a row, but also very much aware of the challenges on the ground. More countries now are looking at their own approaches as opposed to really just forging a united front. But also this comes amidst a very terrible environment globally where, the multilateral institutions, where we've seen a number of negotiations being held, but there's no consensus. So countries are always talking, but there's no agreement.
And speaking about talking, there's another talk happening later this year. What can we expect from that?
So it's going to be a very important one, Shahan, because we know that COP25 in Madrid, there were a lot of marathon of talks with very little outcomes. But of course now people are very cautiously optimistic that the issue of financing, especially the developing countries, they merely contribute about 1%, but they're the ones who are bearing the brunt in terms of the impact of climate change. So now there's a very whole discussion to really try and convince a lot of developed countries to have a buy-in. But it's going to be very hard because you have the likes of the United States who are polluting, but of course they pulled out of the Paris Agreement. So it's going to be really a massive challenge because now there are three elements that you have to look into. It's mitigation, adaptation, and financing, so that you're able to deal with what the United Nations Secretary General terms one of the biggest catastrophes we're facing.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Kylie Hlekuba. I'm about to sneeze. It's climate change.
Well, coronavirus. You must be quarantined.
Oh, my word. No, Kaya. So thanks so much for that. Appreciate it. And, of course, the U.S. is not really involved because Donald Trump is delusional and doesn't believe that climate change actually exists. Well, Kaya Khumalo.